loading text. But I'm not gonna waste time, it can stay like this. So right now, let me show you one more thing. Since we are using Next.js 14, we don't need to use an API. Of course, we can create, and I'm gonna show you how. But if we don't have API endpoint, we don't need to use the fetch method. So how we can fetch data without using any API? Let me comment them out. I will say fetch data with an API. I will do the same thing for the blog page. Let's comment this out. So instead of fetching data directly inside our component, I'm gonna come here and inside library, I will create a new file and it's gonna be data.js. Of course, you don't have to use exactly the same file and folder. You can name them whatever you want. And here I will say export const. I will say export because we are gonna use it in our component. And let's say posts. Actually, let's say get posts. We don't have any data yet, but I can create here a temporary data. Let's say const users. It's gonna be ID1, name John, ID2, Jane, and I'm gonna create some posts. ID, title, body. Second one, user2 and user2. So when we call this function, we can return these posts. Of course, when we create our database, it's going to be an async function and we will fetch our data from the database. But for now, it can stay like that. And I will say get post. I'm going to return a single post. We are going to check our array and we are going to find the post that has this ID. And I will do the same thing for a user, just like this. And in my blog posts, we don't need this function anymore. I can directly call my posts here. Const posts await get posts. Let's check. As you can see, they are here. Let's call this here also with an API, without an API. And for the single page, I'm gonna do exactly the same thing. I will say get post with API and without. And for post user, again, and I will say get user. I will click. Okay, as you can see, there's an error. Let's come back and put here question mark. And if there's a post, we will call this component. And let's see what's inside. Let's check our data here. Const post. Okay, it's undefined. If I say ID, it's 1. If I say type of ID, you are gonna see that it's a string. This must be the problem. If I say parse integer and ID, okay, our post is here. That was the reason. And I'm gonna return this post. But it's not a problem because we are gonna send our slug, not this ID. But for now, it can stay like that. And of course, when we create our database, we are gonna use here try catch blocks, and we will be able to catch our errors and show a user a meaningful error here. Okay, this is how we are going to fetch our data. We will use this data file instead of creating an API. So let's create a MongoDB and fetch our items using that database. I'm going to close everything here and open up MongoDB Atlas. And in this page, you can create your free cluster. I'm not going to show you how to do that. It's really easy. But after creating your free cluster, make sure that you created a user and a password. In my case, it's going to be llamadev and the password will be exactly the same. And we are going to click on the network access. And here we have to add an IP address. Otherwise, we will not be able to make any changes in our database. If you want to, you can add your current IP address. If you deploy your application, you should write here your server IP address. But for this tutorial, to make everything easy, let's say allow access from everywhere, because we are not going to use it in public. So there is no problem. It's going to take a while. And after that, let's click on database. And we are going to connect to our database. We will be using Node.js, so I will click here. And this is our database URL. As you can see, the username, password, I'm going to write here llamadev also. And using this URL, we will be able to connect to our MongoDB. So this is important, and we shouldn't reveal this in public. To do that, we can use env file and hide our secret key. Let's come here. Inside the root file, I will say .env. And let's say mongo equals this URL. I'm going to write here my password. And after this URL, you can write any database name. Let's say N41 tutorial, or you can write blog or whatever you want. After that, let's open up the git ignore file because we don't want to reveal our env, and make sure that .env is included in your file. So when you push your project to GitHub, it will not be visible. So using this variable, I will connect to MongoDB. If you want to, you can install MongoDB, but I prefer using Mongoose. It's much easier to work and it's kinda type safe because you can create your own models. As you can see, there is a cat table, and this table includes only name, and it should be a string. So if you try to create a new cat with name and let's say age, it's gonna throw an error because it should be only name and its type should be a string. To create these kind of models, we are gonna need Mongoose. So let's open up our terminal. I'll create one more terminal here and I will say npm install mongoose. And I'm gonna write here the exact version. It's gonna be 8.0 and 0. Because again, if you watch this tutorial in the future, I don't want you to encounter any error. This is why I want you to use exactly the same version. And after that, let's read the docs. I will say connections. And we will use mongoose and connect method, and we are going to pass here our secret key. Remember, it's inside env file, but I want to use try catch block because it might throw an error. As you can see, try catch. So I'm going to open up my library and let's create connect to db.js. Or if you want to, you can create another file and say utils.js and write your function here. Let's do that. Const connect to db. It's going to be an async function. And I'm going to paste my connection method. Let's import. And it's going to be process, env file, and Mongo. And if there's an error, let's console log this and throw this error. You can write this string or directly pass your error. And I will say export const because we are going to use it. But there's a problem here. Since we are using the development mode, whenever we refresh our application, it's going to create a new connection. To prevent this, I'm going to check if we have the connection or not. If we have, we are going to return the existing connection. If we don't have, we are going to create a new one. So I will say const connection is going to be an empty object. And I will say if connection is connected, we are going to directly return. We are not going to create anything. But if it doesn't exist, I will say const db equals this connection. And I'm going to update my connection here. I will say connection is connected will be database connection. And we are going to take the first connection and ready state. Don't worry about here. You don't have to memorize anything. Basically, we are saying, okay, we don't have any connection. I'm creating a new one. And after creating, we are going to update our connection. And next time when we call this connect to DB, it's going to check the connection. And since it's not empty, it's going to use the existing one. So let's create our models. I'll say models.js. Remember how we were doing this. Mongoose.model, the model name, and whatever we want to create. But also we can use schema. Let me show you how to do that. But first, let's decide what we are going to create. We are going to create a post and a user. It's going to be really easy. I will say const user schema. We are going to create new Mongoose schema. Let's import. Oh, why it imported like that? We are going to be using ES6 import. And using this schema, I'm going to write my types. Firstly, we are going to have a username. And let's write here our options. Its type will be string. I'll say required true because we can't create any user without username. And unique will be true. We cannot create a user with the same username. It should be unique. And what else we can give? We can give minimum character. It's going to be 3. And let's say maximum 20. And what else we can have? We can have an email. Again, type string, required, unique, and let's say maximum 50. And we are going to create a password, and the minimum character will be 6. And we can have an image. Type will be string. But it will not be required, so I will not write anything else. And finally, I will say is admin. The type will be Boolean, and by default, it's going to be false. So if a user logs in, is admin properly will be false. And additionally, we can add here timestamps. It's going to be true. Basically, when we create any user, it's going to create the creation date automatically. So let me close here, by the way. And I will do the same thing for the post. Let's copy this. And it's going to be post schema. So we are going to have a title. It's going to be a string required. It doesn't have to be unique. I will delete this. I will say description. Again, string required. And I can delete this. If you wanna, you can give maximum. We are gonna have an image. I will delete this. but it's not required. We are gonna need the user ID. The type will be string and it's gonna be required. We can't create any post without user. And I'm gonna create one more thing and it's gonna be our Slack. So when we create here a new post, for example, new post, and the Slack will be new dash post. And it has to be unique. Required and unique. Okay, and again, timestamp. Right now, using those schemas, we can create our models. I will say export const user, and we are going to create this user, but there's a problem here. If we already have a user in our database, we don't have to create a new one. Instead, we are going to use the existing one. So I will say mongoose.models. We are going to check our models. If there's a user inside, use it. If not, create new one. And I will do the same thing for post. Just like this. And that's all. Using those models, we are ready to create new user, new post. We can update them, we can fetch them. Let me show you how to do that. Let's close everything and open up data. And right now, I don't need them anymore. Let me comment this out. And I will write here, try catch block. If there's an error, firstly, we are going to console log. And after that, we are going to throw this error. And let's write here, failed to fetch posts. And let's try to fetch our data. I will say const posts. By the way, let me know in the comments if you want to see this coplots or not. It might be annoying for you. If it's annoying, just let me know and I will close. And I will say await post model. And I will say find. So it's gonna return all the posts we have. So let's return this. But of course, to use this method, we should be connected to DB. So I will say connect to DB. So let's do the same thing for others. I will paste here and here. And we are going to have the post Slack. And it's going to be user ID. It can stay like that. And I will say post find. And I'm going to pass here my Slack. It basically means Slack equals Slack. But if you are using the same name, you can directly write it like this. And I'm going to pass this post here. And what about user? We are going to get the ID. I will say user. We are going to be using the user model. And we are going to find by ID. And I'm going to pass here this ID. And again, if you want to get all users that we are going to use in our admin panel, I will just say users find. So it's going to find all and we are going to return. It's that easy, guys. So let's open up our posts page, this blog page, and let's see what we have. As you can see, we don't have any post. Let's come here and add some posts. As you can see, this is the previous project. I'm going to choose my database here and inside users, let's create a new user. I'm doing this because we don't have any admin panel yet. So I will say username is going to be John. Let's add new one. email john@gmail.com. We should get a password 126. Of course, we are gonna hash this password later, but for now it can stay. And what else we have? Let's open up our models. Okay, by default it's gonna be false, is admin, and false. Of course, it's gonna be a boolean. String, string, string. Okay, let's create. And I'm gonna duplicate this. I will say clone, but it's gonna be Jane. Okay. And one more. And let's say admin, and it's gonna be true. Okay. So right now, using this user ID, I can create a new post. I will say user ID, this ID, title, hello world, description, test, and what else? We don't need this. We are gonna need Slack. And let's say hello-world. Okay. Let's create one more. Second post. Second task description. Of course, we can give some images so we can see it better. Let's open up Pexels again. I'm gonna choose this one. So I will say edit, add here new field, and it's gonna be image, and I'm gonna paste it here. Okay, and the other one doesn't have image because I want to show you something. So let's see. I'm gonna refresh the page, and as you can see, hello world and second post. Let's update our image. Inside postcard, I'm gonna write here a condition. I'll say if post has an image, use it here. Like that. And let's click. As you can see, there's an error. Okay, we cannot fetch our user. There's something wrong there. Let's open up the single page and comment this out for now. Okay, we don't have post because this is our post ID. But remember, it has to be Slack. So inside postcard, I'm gonna say block, and it's not gonna be ID, it's gonna be Slack. Let's get back. And when I click, it's gonna open up the hello world. But again, it cannot fetch our data. Let's open up console, and I'm gonna close here. Okay, it's correct. But why it's not showing? By the way, let's say if there's an image, and I'm gonna update my content, it's gonna be post.description. Oh, this is an array. Get post, because when you say find, it's gonna return an array. To prevent this, I will say find one. I can say that because I know that it's unique. So I have to say the same thing here, but we don't need. We are already saying find by ID. It's going to return only one user. And right now, it's here. But what about this image? I use different one. Because I didn't change here. Let me close this menu. And it's gonna be post.image. Okay, perfect. We are gonna change this created at date, but we didn't add them. Let's actually find a user here and copy this created at date. And I'm gonna edit. I'll say created at and paste here. Of course, the type should be the date. I will do the same thing here. Okay, right now I can show it. Let's close here. And I will say post.created at. But if I do that, it's gonna give me an error, as you can see, because the type of our date is a date object. We cannot show it directly. To do that, I will say toString. And as you can see, it shows this long date, but I wanna see only the day, month, and the day, and maybe this year also. It's not today's date because we are using different database here. So I will come here and use a slice method, and I will say take from the first character to 16th character. Actually, I can delete here also. Let's say 4th. And perfect. And what about our user? Let's get this back. As you can see, John is here, but I forgot to change this image. It should be inside this component. So I'm gonna cut this, open up post user, and let's update here. It's gonna be container. After we are gonna have the image, and I'm gonna wrap my texts. Let's say a div texts and wrap my texts. Let's open up our CSS. In this case, it's gonna be texts. For the container, I will say display flags and gap between image and texts will be 20. Okay. Let's remove here. And it's gonna be user.avatar. It was avatar or image. Okay, image. And of course, remember, it's not required. So I should write here a condition if it exists. Actually, I can do here something else. I will say if it exists, show the user image. If it's not, show no avatar.png. Let's check. Okay, it's here. I'm gonna save. And here. And perfect. Of course, I should change its style. Inside single post, remember we had avatar, but we don't need this anymore here. Instead, we are going to be using post user, and before texts, I will say avatar. Okay, so this is how we are fetching data. But remember, when we use API, we were able to stop caching. It was here, I think. Okay. We said cache no store, but how we are gonna do when we don't use fetch? Let's close everything, open up data. So if you don't wanna cache your data, you can add here Next.js no store function. But this feature is not stable for now. Probably it will be stable soon, but we can use it. By the way, let's move them on the top of the file. And I will say import unstable no store as no store from next cache. And when it's stable, you don't have to use this name. It's going to be directly no store, and we will be able to use it. So I'm going to come here and call this function, and that's all. It's not going to cache anymore. As you can see, loading and after John. And this is how you can control caching. So let me show you how to improve search engine optimization. If you open up your layout file, let's close here, you are going to see that there is a metadata. And this is the main title of our application. Let's say next app title and description. And let's open up the home page and inspect. And inside head tag, you are going to see that our title and description is here. But if I open the blog page, again, we are using exactly the same title and description, but it's not a good idea for the search engine optimization. We should give different title and description for each page, especially for our posts, products, whatever important for your SEO. Because people are gonna search for the title of posts or anything in the description. In this example, you can see that statically changing title and description is really easy. Just copy this metadata and let's open up the contact page. And before this function, I will just say metadata, next app, contact page, and contact description. And I can do the same thing for example, about page. Let's open up. As you can see, it's here. This is how we can change statically. But before explaining how to create dynamic titles and descriptions, let me show you one more thing here. If you realize we are using this text all the time, next app, contact page, next app, about page, and for the home page, we are directly using next app title. So instead of writing this text again and again, we can create our own template. Let's see how to do that. I'm going to open up my layout, and instead of this text, I'm going to create here an object, and I will say by default, it's going to be Next.js 14 homepage. And also I'm going to create here a template, and I will use %s, and let's say Next.js 14, and let's leave it like this. Basically, instead of this s, we can use different titles, but we don't have to add this part again and again. Let's try. I will come here and let's delete here, contact page and about page. This is the Next.js 14 homepage, about page and our default template, and contact page. This is how we can use it. So what about dynamic title and description? Let's open up our single post, and I want to add this title to metadata and this description. So let's open up the single page. So I'm going to come here and say export const. I can't use metadata because I have to fetch this post first and get the title and description. So I'm going to use generate metadata. It's going to be async, and again we can get our params and we can destructure as we did here, and we can fetch our data. And using this data, we can return our title and description. It's going to be post title and post description. Let's see. As you can see, hello world, and our description. If I open up the second page, second single post, as you can see, it's here. Perfect. You might think that why we are fetching data twice. But don't worry, in Next.js, if you try to fetch exactly the same data twice or multiple times, Next.js fetches only once. So even if you use an API call, it's not gonna fetch again. It's gonna make only one request. So let me explain you server actions, and after that we will be able to add our own posts and users. So let's create our first server action. I'm gonna come here and I will say actions.js, and let's create a function. Say hello. And to make this function a server action, I'm gonna write here use server directive. And after this point, whatever I do inside this function is gonna run on the server. So let's say console log hello. And there's something important here. If you are using server actions, your function has to be async. Whether you are returning an async event or not, doesn't matter. It has to be async. So I will say export, and let's use it in our, let's say, actually I'm gonna create new page, server action test, page.js x component test page. So right now inside this div, let's create a form, and it's gonna include only a button, test me. And when I click on this button, it's gonna call our action. What was the name? Say hello. I'm gonna import. I'm gonna open my terminal, and let's see. Server action test. And when I click here, as you can see, it calls our function and it says hello. And since we are using a form, we can create any inputs here like post title, description, or whatever. And using this action file, we can create a new post. By the way, you don't have to create this file. You can also create your own action here. Const action in component. As I said, it has to be async. Console log, it works. Let me write it like that. And of course, I will say use server. Let's try. I'm gonna click and it works. So let's see how it works. I'm gonna open my console and network tab, and when I click here, you are gonna see that it's actually calling an API request. As you can see, the request URL is our URL, and payload includes an action ID. If we have any input here, it's gonna include that also, and it returns us 200 status code. So basically, whenever you call an action, it's gonna make a post request. So instead of this small test, let's try to add a new user. Of course, we are not an admin and we are not authenticated. We are gonna handle this later, but for now, to understand server actions better, let's do that. I'm gonna delete this. Actually, let's say add post async, and when we have our inputs here, remember we need a title, description, Slack, and what else? Let's check. Title, description, image, it's not required. Okay, user ID. And they all are gonna be string, so they can stay like this. And when I click on this button, let's say create, we are gonna take all this form data as a prop. So I will say form data, and let's see what we have inside. I'm gonna call this action, of course. Let's delete this. And here, let's see. I will say, let me zoom in. Title, description, Slack, and user ID. And let's try to destructure our items. Const title equals form data get title, description, and Slack. Let's see them. I'm gonna click. As you can see, they are null because we didn't provide any name. It's really important. Name, description, Slack, and user ID. Let's see right now. I'm gonna click, and as you can see, they are here. And also you can destructure this instead of writing them one by one. So let's comment this out, and I will say const title, description, and Slack from form data, and also user ID. Let's check. Again, I will click. Of course, it's undefined because we didn't get any of those items. To do that, we are going to be using object from entries and form data. Let's try. And they are here. And right now, using those fields, we can add a new post. To do that, firstly, I'm going to be connected to MongoDB. So I will say connect to DB. If you wanna, let's write here, try catch block. If there is an error, we are gonna console log and we are gonna return, let's say, error, something went wrong. And after connecting, I will say const new post, and I'm gonna create a new post. Remember, this is our model. I'm gonna import, and I'm gonna pass inside my title, description, and Slack, and user ID. Let me close here. And after that, I can save this to our database. So I will say await new post dot save. And let's write here a console log save to DB. Let's open up again. And when I click save to DB, let's check. I'm gonna refresh. And as you can see, it's here. And if I visit my blog page, you can see that our item is here. Let's add new one. Title 2, description 2, Slack 2, and user ID. And again, it's here. But if you remember, in our data file, when we fetch our posts, we are not using noStore function as we did here, but it still shows our posts. That's because we are in the development mode. If you build your application, you will not be able to see your changes immediately. But how we can let Next.js know that we added a new post and it should update our page? It's really easy. I will just come here in my action. And after the successful operation, I will say revalidate path. And I'm gonna write here my URL, which is blog. So whenever I add a new post, even if we cache our blog posts, it's gonna revalidate our path and it's gonna show us the fresh data. So this is how we are using server actions. We can do the same thing for deleting data. How we can do this? I will say delete post, and we are gonna need only post ID. Actually, let's directly say ID. And again, we are gonna be connected to MongoDB. And after, I will say await post model and find by ID and delete. And I'm gonna pass here my ID, delete it from DB, and if everything is okay, again, we are gonna revalidate our path and it's gonna refresh our data. It's that easy, guys. By the way, if you are using multiple server actions in one file, you don't have to provide use server directive again and again. Just use it at the top of the file. So it's gonna apply for any function. So let's come here and I'm gonna create another form. I will call delete data. What was the name? Delete post. Of course, I should export first. And we are gonna need a post ID. I will create a button and I will say delete. Let's try. Let's get this post ID. If you want to, you can pass the slug also, but anyway, ID is a better option. We are gonna take this ID and delete. Okay, let's try. I will get back and refresh. It's here. I'm gonna paste, delete. If I go to the blog page, okay, it's still here because again, I forgot adding here the name. It's really important, guys. You shouldn't forget. And it's gonna be ID. Remember, here. Let's try again. I will paste and delete. I will check and it's not here anymore. As you can see, you don't need any API route. You don't need to use any click event and track this progress. Everything is much easier. So the question is, are we replacing APIs with server actions? If you ask my opinion, the answer is no. If you have a complex application, if you are using multiple platforms, you are still gonna need an API because you can dispatch your actions only on your website. And also, if you have a huge schema like posts, users, categories, products, of course, using an API might be a better solution. So it depends on your project. But again, in my opinion, if you have a small application and just have couple tables, I think server actions are great. But if you have something complex, use API routes. Let me show you how to do this also, and you can compare. So let me explain how to create an API route. If you remember, we can create our pages in the app directory using the path name of the pages, and we will do something similar here. We will create our API inside the app router. So let's say API, and the path name of this API will be /API. And inside our API, we are going to have some endpoints like API and users, and inside users, another endpoint, and it's going to be API users and the user ID. So using this ID, we can get, delete, or update our user. And let's create one more, and it's going to be posts. So we can do exactly the same thing here. In the app directory, I'm going to create a folder called API, but there is something important here. We have to let Next.js know that this is an API route, not a page. So the file name has to be route.js or ts. And right now, Next.js knows that this is an API route and it's ready to get our user requests and send a response. So in this example, we are going to have users route, and using this route, we will be able to get all users or create a new one. So let's move this here, and I'm going to create my users folder. Just like that. And for this endpoint, again, I'm going to create a folder, but remember, this number will be dynamic. So inside users, I'm going to create a dynamic route, and I will say the user ID, and using this ID, we can make the CRUD operations. So this is how we can create Next.js APIs. So let me show you how to receive a request and send a response in Next.js API routes. So I'm going to come here and create a new folder. And it's going to be API. And for the blog page, for example, we are going to fetch our data. And inside, I will say route.js. Since we are fetching data, our request will be a GET request. So I will say export const GET request is going to be async. And we are going to get the user request. Let's say request. And again, try catch block. If there is an error, we are going to console log. And also we can throw this error. New error, failed to fetch posts. It's exactly the same. Let's connect to the MongoDB. And again, posts, await, post, and find. I'm going to import this. And if everything is okay, we are going to return this post. To do that, we are going to be using Next.js response. Next response, it comes from Next server, JSON, and posts. That's all. For this example, we don't need any request because we are fetching all these posts anyway. Let's use this endpoint and fetch our data in the blog page. If you remember, we are fetching data with an API just like this. And right now, instead of this fake API, we can use our endpoint. So I will say localhost 3000 API and block. Let's get this back. And right now, I'm going to comment this out and take it back. There's an SSL problem, of course, it's going to be HTTP. Let's see. I'm going to refresh. As you can see, they are still here. Nothing has changed. So what about single post? Let's create our slug and route.js. And we are going to do exactly the same thing. But this time we are going to need our params. Remember how we are doing this? We are able to take our params like that. So we can do exactly the same thing in our API routes. but be careful, it has to be after request, like that. So let's destructure our Slack, const Slack from params. So using this Slack, I can find my post. Remember how we are doing this, find one, and I'm gonna pass here my Slack like this. Let's say post, post, and post. So let's use this API route right now. I'm gonna come here, comment this out, open my API fetching, and here, of course not this title, and I'm gonna change my URL. Localhost 3000, API, and Slack. Of course, you can write this URL in your env file, so each time you don't have to change everything. By the way, as you can see, there's an error because I didn't write here block. But again, there is something wrong. Let's check. But localhost 3000, API block, and Slack. Okay, the reason is I forgot making this dynamic. Right now I will refresh and it's here. Perfect. So you can do the same thing for post or delete requests. So you can come here and say delete. Again, we can delete one and pass here our Slack. Failed to delete post. Of course, we are not gonna return anything. We can just say post deleted. So when you want to delete your post, you have to make a delete request, and it's gonna be just like fetch block our Slack, but the method will be the delete method. But of course, we are not gonna delete anything, and it can stay like that. Let's leave it like this. And I'm gonna close everything. Right now, we know how to fetch data, how to add new data, or how to delete. But to do that, we have to be authenticated first, and we have to be an admin. And we can restrict our blog posts. It can be premium feature for authenticated users. So if we are not logged in, we will not be able to see our posts. So let's learn Next.js 14 authentication. So let's open up the documentation of Auth.js, and I'm gonna click on API reference and find the latest version. As you can see, it's still beta, but it's compatible with Next.js 14. In the previous version, we had to use API routes, we had to wrap our entire application with an auth provider, but after this version, everything stays on the server side. So let's open up the documentation and see how to use it. Firstly, we are going to install Next.auth and beta. And when you watch this tutorial, probably it will be version 5. But for now, we have to use it like that. And again, I highly recommend you to use exactly the same version with me. So I will say npm install 5.0.0 beta and 3. During this installation, let's see how to use it. As you can see, we are gonna need two environment variables, Next.auth URL and secret. And after that, we are gonna need a configuration file. And inside this configuration file, we are gonna create this function and pass our providers. It can be Google provider, GitHub, or any other social media. And also, we can use user credentials. Let's first create our secret and URL. I'm gonna close here, open up my env file, and I will say auth secret and URL is gonna be localhost 3000, our URL, and we should add here API and auth. And for the secret, you can write anything you want, or you can generate a secret key using OpenSSL. Like that. Let's copy this and paste here. It really doesn't matter what you write here. We are using this because when we are authenticated, NextAuth is gonna create a session using this secret ID. So I'm gonna save here and let's create a new file. auth.js. Let's paste this here. And to use GitHub provider, firstly we should create a new GitHub app. To do that, let's open up GitHub. And I'm gonna scroll down and find the developer settings. And I should create a new authentication app. Let's say N41 tutorial. Homepage URL will be our URL. And the callback URL will be our URL, API, auth, callback, and GitHub. So when you use other providers, again, you are gonna use same endpoint. You are just gonna change here. It's gonna be Google, Facebook, or whatever. Let's create. As you can see, it gives us a client ID and secret. We are gonna use them inside our env file. Let's copy this. And here I will say GitHub ID, and I'm gonna paste this, and GitHub secret. Let's reveal our secret. I will copy and paste. Okay, right now we can use them in our configuration. Client ID will be process env GitHub ID. And client secret will be GitHub secret. So using this function, we will be able to reach our user sessions, and also we can use sign in methods or sign out method. So we will use this in our login page, and we are going to use this in our navbar component. Let's come here and open up the login page. And let's open up login. And let's call this function. To do that, we can use a form here and call this inside a server action. So I will say button login with GitHub. Of course, it's going to be a form here. I will say handle GitHub login. Let's create this function here, GitHub login, and it's gonna be use server. Don't forget adding here async. When I click on this button, I'm gonna call the sign in function. Let's import. And inside, I'm gonna write my provider. As you can see, there are many providers, but we are gonna be using GitHub. And of course, it's an async function, so I will say await. And let's see. I'm gonna click here. And as you can see, this is our app name. I'm gonna authorize, but before, let's try to console log our session. Remember, we have auth here, and let's see what we have inside. I will come here and say async const session equals await auth. I'm gonna import. And let's see what's inside. By the way, there is a problem here because we didn't create our authentication endpoint. If you remember, we are using API and auth, but we didn't create anything. Let's come inside API and new folder, and it's gonna be auth. And our library is gonna handle every single endpoint like login, logout, error, or whatever it might be. So I'm gonna create a new folder and spread next auth. So we don't have to write one by one logout, error, or anything it might be. Let me show you actually. I'm gonna come back and let's say getting started. And as you can see in the documentation, it says we should create API route, auth endpoint, and another endpoint, which is next auth. Of course, it's using pages directory. We are using the new app router. So instead of writing next auth.ts, I should create here a route file. Remember, this is how we are creating our endpoints. And as you can see, auth.js handles every single endpoint for us. We don't have to create any of those. This is why we are spreading this endpoint like that. It might be confusing, but this is how it works. Okay. So this library is going to handle all the get and post methods. If you remember, we have handlers here, and it includes get and post methods. And we can take those and export inside our route. I will say export get and post from library and auth. Let's click and authorize. Okay, there is still something wrong. Oh, when did I create this? There is a layout, but we don't need this layout. I'm gonna delete. Okay, there is no problem. And if you check your terminal, you are gonna see your user session. As you can see, inside this session, we have a user object, and inside we have the username, email, and image. So we don't have to worry about sessions, tokens, cookies. NextAuth does everything for us. If you use a custom authentication like sign in with user credentials, you don't have to create this API route. But if you are using social media accounts like GitHub, Google, Facebook, you should create this route. Otherwise, it's not gonna handle the session process. And let's try to log out. If you want to, you can move this function into action.js. I'm gonna scroll down and I will say export const handle GitHub login, and I'm gonna import this sign in. I'm gonna save and let's import here. In this case, we don't need this. Actually, we don't need this either. We are not going to check anything. When we create our middleware, after the login process, it's going to redirect us to the home page. So let's give logout functionality for this button. I'm going to open up navbar. And inside, remember, we have links component. And here, where is logout? Here. So I will come here and create a form. And let's write our action handle logout. Let's create this. I will duplicate and change the name. And here I'm going to call the sign out function. We don't have to pass anything. And I'm gonna import it here. By the way, let's call our user session. If you remember, we were using these temporary variables, session and isAdmin. Right now, instead of this session, I can directly call my auth function, await, and auth. Let's import. And of course, our component will be an async component. But there is a problem here. We said use async. In this case, our component will be a server-side component, but here we are using use statehook, which can be used in only client components. To prevent this problem, I'm gonna leave it as client-side component, and I'm gonna take my session as a prop. Async component, we are gonna call auth function, and we are gonna pass this session here. Session equals session. Let's take it as a prop. As you can see right now, we don't have any problem. It's gonna check our session, and if session.user is admin, we are gonna see this link and this button. If not, we are gonna see this link. By the way, let's say user. Let's refresh the page. And I'm gonna click here, but before I should console log. Otherwise we can't see. Console log. Session. Okay, it's here. When I click, as you can see, logout button disappeared because we are not authenticated anymore. If you check your terminal, you are gonna see this null value. Let's try again. Okay, authenticated. And when I click, logged out. So this is how you can create social media authentications. But how we are gonna add this user to our database? Firstly, when we log in, we are gonna check if the user exists in our DB or not. If it doesn't, we are gonna create a new user. If we already have that user, we are gonna return that user directly. And in this case, we will be able to use the isAdmin property, because when we log in, as you can see, we have only name, email, and image. But also, when we create a new user, isAdmin will be false. How we are gonna do this? I'm gonna close everything and open up auth.js. And after providers, I'm gonna write callbacks. And the callback will be sign in. Async sign in. And as you can see, it returns the user, account, and profile. Let's check what's inside. I'll just say user, account, and profile. And for now, I'm gonna return true. It's gonna be a comma. And let's see. I'm gonna log in. And as you can see, this is our account. It shows our provider and the user access token. And profile includes our avatar URL, email, or anything related to our GitHub account. So using those informations, we can create a new user. You can use any information you want. So what I'm gonna do here, let me shrink this. Firstly, I will say if account.provider equals GitHub, because remember, inside account object, we have provider and it's GitHub. Basically, I'll say if user is authenticated with a GitHub account, connect to DB and try to find that user. I'll say try catch. If there is an error, I will console log and I'm gonna return false. So if you return false inside this sign-in function, even if user signs in with the GitHub account, if we fail to search for that user in our database, the user is not gonna be authenticated. we have to check it in RDB first. So I will say const user, await user, let's import our model. I will say find one, and I'm gonna check the profile email. If it doesn't exist, I'm gonna create a new one. I will say if there is no user in our database, const new user, and we can use profile name, email, and image. And if you want to, you can write here is admin false, but remember, by default, it's already false. We don't have to write it. And after that, I'm gonna save it to my database. Okay, there's a mistake here. Let's check. It ends here. We don't need this and this. Okay. And if we don't have user, we are going to create new one. If we already have, we are going to return true. Actually, let's return after this function. Okay. Okay, we couldn't import this model. So let's add here question mark. Okay, I'm gonna log in. And there's an error. Let's check. It says there is no provider because I didn't destructure them. Let's try again. I'm gonna log out and log in. And as you can see, access denied. We missed something. If there's an error, it's gonna show this page. And if you realize it's showing different URL, when I click, it shows the default login page. But in our application, we are using the login path. We are gonna change this. But before, let's check our error. As you can see, user validation failed because we didn't add any username. We set name, but it has to be username, and also the password is required. But in a social media authentication, we don't need any password. So I'm going to open up my model and change my field. I'm going to delete this and here. And as you can see, the field name is username. We are going to change it like that. Let's try again. I will log in. Okay, it's not passing our username. There is something wrong. Let's console log again this profile and see what's going on. I will come back and log in. I'm going to open up links. Maybe this console is coming from our navbar. Okay, the profile is here. Oh, it's not name, it's login. So you have to be careful here because when you use GitHub, the username is login. When you use Google, the username is display name, or when you use any other provider, it can be username or just name. So make sure first which data includes your username, otherwise you are going to encounter this error. So I will say profile.login. And again, for URL, we are going to use this. And email is correct. Let's try one more time. I will click and let's check our data. I'm going to refresh. And it's here. So when I log out and try to log in again, it's going to find this user. So it's not going to create the new one. So right now, let's see how we can create user using the credentials. So firstly, we can create the register page and after we can log in. So let's come here and say register. Okay, we didn't create this page yet. Inside register, I will say page.jsx. I will create my component. Let's say register page. And I'm going to create here a form. So let's say form. We are going to add our action here, but before, let's create our inputs. Placeholder, let's say username. And remember, you should add here a name because we are going to be using server actions. Username. We are going to need email. Password. And one more, let's say password again. So let's say password repeat. And finally, a button, and I will say register. So let's create our action. And I will say export const register async form data. And let's get username, email, and password from our form data. And also password repeat. And firstly, I'm going to check if the passwords are equal or not. I will say if password doesn't equal password repeat, I will return password does not match. And if they are equal, finally, we can create our user. Of course, firstly, we should check if it exists in our database or not. If not, we are going to create a new one. So let's say const user model. I will say find one and I'm going to search for the username. If there is a user in our database, I will return user already exists. So we can't create a new one. If not, we are going to create a new user, username, email, password. And if there's an image, we can add this also. But remember, it's not required. In any case, I'm adding here. And after, we are going to save the user. And if there's an error, we are going to return this error. Let's call this in our register page. And let's see. We are going to give a style. Actually, let's give quickly. I will say register.css. And I'm going to paste my style. There is nothing important here. And let's give a class name. Styles.form. Let's import our styles. Okay, by the way, I forgot module. If you want to, let's create here a wrapper and change the background color of that wrapper. It's going to be our container. And inside, I'm going to create a new div. It's going to wrap our form. And its class name will be wrapper. So let's center everything inside this container and give a size for our wrapper and change the background color. Okay, it's much better. And I forgot adding here a weight. And let's see. We have a weight here. Let's try. I hope everything works properly. I will say from client. From client at gmail.com. Password and password. I will click. Let's check our database. I'm gonna refresh. And as you can see, our user is here. But there is something important here. As you can see, our password is a plain text. But before storing passwords, you should hash them first. To do that, we are going to be using a library. and it's gonna be bcrypt. npm install and bcrypt. Let's see how it works. I'm gonna open up the repository and find the usage. As you can see, this is gonna be the plain text that comes from the user. Firstly, we are gonna generate a salt, and after using this hash method, we are gonna encrypt our password. Let's do that. I will say bcrypt from bcrypt. And before creating a new user, I'm gonna change this password. So let's say generate salt, and after const hash password await bcrypt hash method, and we are gonna pass here the user password and the generated salt. And right now we can use our password here. So let's try again. From client with password. Let's change here. And I will say from 1 to 6. I will register and let's see. And right now our password is hashed. So when we log in, again we are going to take the password from the user and we are going to hash it again, and we will compare that password with this password. If they are equal, the user will be authenticated. Let's do that, and after I'm going to show you how to handle errors here, because if I try to create a new user, it's going to return this error. But to see this error here, we are going to be using a hook. But before, let's see how to log in. I'm going to come here and let's create a form. I will close everything and open up my login page. And after this GitHub form, I'm going to create a new one, and it's going to be login action. Of course, we are going to create later, but for now, let's create our inputs. Placeholder will be username, and the name will be, again, username. One more, and it's going to be password. And finally, a button. Let's say login with credentials. Let's create this. I'm going to open up actions. And let's duplicate this actually. And I'm going to say login. So what we are going to do, we are going to take the username and password. I will delete the rest. We don't need here. And let's delete here. If there's an error, we will say something went wrong. And we are gonna sign in using next auth credentials. So I will say await. Remember, we have a sign in method comes from next auth. And the provider name will be credentials. And we are gonna pass here our username and password. Let's see. I'm gonna save and call this login function here. Right now we are passing our username and password, but auth.js doesn't know how we are crypting our password. So inside our provider, we should let it know that we are using MongoDB, we are passing the username and password and encrypting our credentials. Let's do that inside providers, and after GitHub, I will create credentials provider. Let's import this as we did for GitHub. Credentials provider, next auth providers, and credentials. And after that, inside, I'm going to write my rules. To do that, we are going to be using authorize function. And we are going to pass here our credentials. There's a typo here. Okay. And inside, firstly, we are going to find our user using MongoDB. If the user exists and password is correct, we are going to return that user. If not, we are going to return null. So authentication will be failed. Let's actually create here a function. Otherwise, it's going to be really complicated here. I will say const login async function. We are going to take the credentials and I will say try catch block. If there is an error, console log, and after throw that error. Let's say failed to login. And here I will say connect to DB. I will find my user. You already know how to do that. User model, find one, and we are going to pass here our username. And it's going to come from our credentials. And after, if there is no user, we are going to throw another error. And I will say user not found. But if you want to, you can say wrong credentials. And after, I'm going to check my password. I will say const is password correct. We are going to be using bcrypt and compare method. I will import. Okay, let's do this manually. Okay. And we are going to pass here the password comes from user, which is credentials and password. And the password, which is inside our user into DB. And again, another condition, if password is not correct, we are going to throw this error, wrong credentials. And finally, if everything is okay, we are going to return our user. Let's call this function here. Let's say try catch again. If there is any error, we are going to return null. We will not have any user. So let's call our function here, await login and credentials. And if everything is okay, we are going to return our user. Okay, let me check those awaits again. Because sometimes copload doesn't add them, as you can see. Await. And okay, there is something wrong. There is something wrong about bcrypt. Okay guys, let's remove this bcrypt and try to add bcrypt.js. npm uninstall bcrypt and npm install bcrypt.js. Let's change the library name bcrypt.js and in action. I'm gonna run again npm run dev. Okay, there is no problem. Okay, let's try. I'm gonna zoom in. We are gonna give style, but for now it can stay. What was the name? From client with password and 1 to 6, and I will log in. Okay, it seems nothing has changed, but if I refresh the page, you are gonna see that we are logged in. So it works. But if I give different credentials, for example, that doesn't exist, I will log in and refresh the page. And as you can see, we are not logged in. So after the login process, we have to redirect our user to home page. To do that, we are going to be using middleware. But before, let me show you how you can handle errors. When we add different credentials, we can't see our errors here. Or when we register, again, we cannot see our errors. Let me zoom out and open up our register action here. And how we are going to show those messages. Of course, instead of sending here a text, you can throw new error and say password do not match, and it's gonna open the error page. Let's do that actually. I'm gonna save and let's write something. I'm gonna register. As you can see, we are in the error page. And using that page, we can show our error message, but it's not a good idea because if there is an error, user has to go to the register page and write all this information again and again. To prevent this, we are going to be using use form state hook. Let's search for it. I opened React documentation, and as you can see, this hook allows us to update the state based on the result of a form action. Let's check the example and you are going to understand better. As you can see, we have a form here and we are going to create our action here. Basically, this form state stores a state and we are going to pass here its initial value. In this example, it's 0. When we click on this form button, it's going to trigger form action, which is here. And this form action is going to dispatch our increment function. And it's going to pass this current value. And it's going to take that value, previous state, and also form data. Of course, there is no input here, but you can use form data. And what it basically does is increasing the number. So our current state will be 1 right now. If I click one more time, again, it's going to fire this function, but our state will be 1, and it's going to take that state and increase again. So how we can implement this in our register function? Basically, we can pass here an empty string, and when we trigger our server action, if there is an error, we can update that state. It will not be empty string anymore. It's going to be do not match, or username already exists, or something went wrong. By the way, for the consistency, we can add here object and error, because here we are using error. And again, I will do the same thing and error. If you want to, you can directly pass your text, doesn't matter, but this is gonna be our state. And we can check this state, and if there is an error, we can show it in our register page. This is the login page. I'm going to open up register. Okay, so let's use this hook, but remember, if you are using a hook, your component should be a client-side component. So let's create another component here. Inside components, let's close here. I will say register form .jsx. I will create my function and let's create style. And I'm gonna import this. Let's say container import styles from register form module CSS. Okay, so let's come here and copy this form. Actually, let's cut and paste here. We don't need this do. Okay, and I will say it's gonna be a client-side component. And right now I can use this use form state hook. Just like this. Let's import. Okay, I can't import. Let's do this by copying here. It comes from React DOM. And at the beginning, our state will be, let's say, undefined. We are not going to have anything. And our action will be register. And I'm going to pass this action here. Let's import. Right now, I'm going to call my component here, register form. We don't need this action anymore. And let's come here and copy this. form and paste inside our new component CSS file. You can leave it form or change it to container, doesn't matter. And after this button, I can show my error. I will say if state has an error, show it here. But what if it's successful? As you can see, we are just writing a console message, but we are not returning anything. So I'm gonna return success true. And again, this information will be inside this state. So using that success boolean, I can redirect my user to the login page. So I will say use effect hook if state dot success. We are going to be using use rather hook to redirect our user. So I will say const rather use rather hook. Let's import this from next navigation, and using this hook, I'm going to push my user to the login page. There is a typo here. Okay. Of course, we are going to need our dependencies, and it's going to be state.success and our rather. Okay. And if you want to, let's add here a link. I will ask user have an account if you have login. And the href will be the login page. Let's refresh. And don't forget question mark. And there is one more thing. When we call our server action, we should pass here the previous state. Let's open up action. And we have form data, but we are going to also have the previous state. Let's try. I'm going to refresh. As you can see, our link is here. And if I use exactly the same username, let's copy this again. gmail.com, password, and register. As you can see, username already exists. If I give different and here, but if I change my first password do not match. So this is how we can handle server action errors. And this is awesome because even if you don't run JavaScript on your computer, it's still gonna work. So let's give the correct credentials. Let's say 2. Let's paste the same password. I will register. And we are in the login page. Perfect. So let's do the same thing for the login page. But before, I want to give my style. It's gonna be exactly the same. Inside components, I will say login form, .jsx, module.css. Let's copy here and paste actually. Again, client import will be login action, login form CSS. Again, form state, use effect, use rather. I'm going to change the name of the component. It's going to be login form. And we are going to make some changes here. We are going to need username and password. And I'm going to say login. If there is a state and error, we are going to show. And I'm going to change here. And let's say don't. By the way, if you are using code here, it's going to give this warning. It's not an error, but it's better to use it like this. Okay, Let's call this component inside login page. Here, I'm gonna delete this form and write my login component. In this case, we don't need this login. And again, let's give class name, styles, container. One more is gonna be wrapper. I'm gonna wrap my items. Import styles from login module CSS, but we don't have. Let's create. And again, I'm gonna center my wrapper and let's give style for our form. And let's copy this from register component. I'm gonna copy and paste. Okay, if you want to, you can change this GitHub button. Let's do that quickly. Login CSS. And I will say GitHub. It's gonna be 100%. I'm gonna give some padding. Cursor will be pointer. Of course, I'm gonna give class name styles.github. Okay, it can stay like that. I don't want to waste time. Let's open up our action and see what are our messages. By the way, we don't need this. We are not fetching anything. And let's close everything and open up action. And inside login, as you can see, we return here something went wrong. And we are gonna need our previous state. And let's try. I will give some username that doesn't exist. Any password here. And I'm gonna log in. As you can see, something went wrong. And let's open up our server and see our error message. As you can see, the error message is credential sign-in. So when we give different credential, Nextauth throws this error. So using this message, we can return a meaningful message. So let's write here an if block, and I will say if error.message includes this message, let's copy. I'm gonna return error and it says wrong username or password. And if it's not the case, if there's something other, we are gonna throw this error. Let's do the same thing again. I'm gonna log in. As you can see, invalid username or password. Perfect. But there is something important here. If I write the correct credential from 1 to 6, and as you can see, it returns an error, but our credential is correct. And if you check your terminal, you are gonna see the next redirect error. But why this is happening? Because after the successful authentication, Nextauth redirects our user to home page using Next.js redirect method, and this method intentionally throws an error. And since we are using try catch block here, even if we are successfully authenticated, it's gonna catch that error. Let's open up the documentation. As you can see, calling redirect function throws a next redirect error. It does this because when you use the redirect function, Next.js wants to terminate whatever you do and redirect to desired page. To prevent this error, you can remove the try catch block, but in this case, we are not gonna catch our credential error. It's not a good idea. So what we can do here, instead of returning this message, I will throw this error. And if I log in, as you can see, we are logged in and we are in the login page. And right now, there is one more thing to do. If we are logged in, we shouldn't see this page. And also, if we are not authenticated, we shouldn't see blog pages. And if we are not an admin, we shouldn't see this admin page. You might think that we can use this auth function. Remember, it returns our user session. You can open up the login page and call our session, and we can say if there is a user, router push and the home page. You can also check if the user is admin or not. You can use this functionality for the admin page, but there is a better solution, and it's Next.js middleware. Because using middleware, you can interrupt your requests and you can check the user permission without rendering this page. It's not even gonna visit this page. Next.js is gonna detect this URL. It's gonna check the user. If it's not admin, it's not gonna call the admin page. So let's do that. I'm gonna remove this. Actually, let's close everything and this terminal. And inside source directory, I'm gonna create a file, and it's gonna be middleware. And if you are not using source directory, you should create this file inside your root folder, not inside app directory. We are gonna have here our default config object. It's not gonna interrupt our API calls or static files. And here I can use my auth function. But how we are gonna write our rules? To do that, inside callbacks, I'm gonna create a new function, and it's gonna be authorized. And this function includes our user session and the user request. Of course, I'm gonna destructure this. And using this function, we can write our authorization rules. For example, we can say if auth doesn't exist, redirect user to login page, or if the user admin, they are allowed to see the admin page, and so on. But there is something important here. If we use our auth function inside middleware, it's not gonna work because we are using a Node.js library here, bcrypt. Also, we are using Mongoose, but the middleware is independent from any Node.js dependent library. To prevent this, instead of writing our function here, let's copy this and create a new file. And it's going to be auth config.js. I will say export const auth config, and I will say callbacks and write my function here. Let's try. I will just say return false, but I have to pass here my login page, because if we are not authenticated, if we are returning false, it's going to redirect us to the login page. So I will say pages, sign in, and it's going to be the login page. And again, we should write here providers and leave it empty because we already defined them here. GitHub and credentials. We shouldn't have to write this, but if you don't write, it's not gonna work. So I'm gonna save. And let's use this config file here. I'm gonna call next auth first and auth config. And I will say export default next auth, and I'm gonna pass here my configuration and the auth function. So let's call our configuration inside the main function. I'm gonna come here and say auth config. Let's import like that. So it's gonna spread everything inside our configuration like providers. But since we are using different providers, it's gonna overwrite. So we will be able to use them. But inside callbacks, again, it's gonna overwrite. So we will not be able to use this function. To prevent this, I'm gonna come here and I will say auth config.callbacks. Okay. Let's see right now. Of course, it should be library. And as you can see, it redirects me to the login page. If I try to reach the home page, about page, contact, blog, doesn't matter, I will not be able to do that. Let's say blog. As you can see, it doesn't let me to visit any page, because in any case, using this configuration, we are returning false. And since we return false, it redirects us to the login page. So right now I can write here my conditions. By the way, let's log out and let's see what's inside this auth function. Let's say true, otherwise we will not be able to see that. I'm gonna log in. I'm gonna open up my terminal. And as you can see, it includes our session, which has our username, email, and image. This is the default behavior. And if you log in with the user credentials, what was the name? Let's copy. 126, login. And right now it includes only our email. We don't have username. We don't have is admin. To prevent this, we should add the user information inside this session. To do that, we are going to need two more functions here. I know it's a little bit complicated, but this is how it works. The first one will be async JWT, and the second one will be async session. Basically, when we are logged in, next auth is creating a token, JWT token, and we have the user here, the user information, and using this information, we can update our token. Let me show you how to do that. I will say if there is a user, token.id will be the user ID, and token.isAdmin will be user is admin. Of course, if. And finally, we are gonna return our updated token. So right now, using this token, we can update our session. It's gonna be exactly the same thing. We are gonna have the session and token, and this time we are gonna update our session. Session user ID will be token ID, and isAdmin will be token isAdmin. We can reach this data because we updated our token here. In any case, we can control our token. Okay, right now let's see what's inside auth. I'm gonna log out. Let's write our credentials and log in. Open up the terminal. Right now we have the email, ID, and isAdmin. So you can add here whatever you want. You can add the username, or if you have any other fields, you can add it here. But the important thing is admin here, because using this field, we can redirect our user. Firstly, let's check our user. Const user auth.user. And we are gonna check if the user is on the admin panel. Const is on admin panel. And we are going to check it using this request. Request next URL starts with admin. So if it's admin, it's going to be true. So I can do the same thing for my blog posts. If on blog page, and it's going to be blog. And one more, and it's going to be is on login page. So right now we are going to have a couple of conditions. First one will be only admin can reach the admin dashboard. And the second one will be only authenticated users can reach the blog page. And finally, only unauthenticated users can reach the login page. So let's write here our functionality. I will say if, let's write it like this, is on admin panel and user is not admin, we are going to return false. And it's going to redirect us to the login page. And the second one, if is on blog page and if there is no user, again, we are going to return false because it's not authenticated. And finally, if is on the login page and user exists, this time we will not be able to see the login page. So I will say return Next.js response redirect. And we are going to create here a new URL and we are going to pass home page request.next URL. This is how we are using redirect. And finally, if none of them, we are going to return true. Let's see right now. Okay, request next URL. It should be path name here. Dot path name. Okay. Let's try to open up the login page. As you can see, I can't because I'm authenticated. Let's try to see the blog pages. As you can see, I can because I'm authenticated. And if I try to visit the admin page, I cannot because I'm not an admin. Let's log out and try to open up the login page. As you can see, I'm not authenticated. Let's try to reach the admin page. Again, I cannot. And if I log in, oops, let's actually make this admin true. Admin is here and I can see my admin page. And that's all. And as I said, I know it's a little bit confusing, but when you create a couple of projects, you are going to get used to and you are going to understand better. It's an awesome library, but as far as I know, a really small group of people try to write this documentation. This is why it still uses Next.js pages and it's not updated so often. When you try reading their documentation, don't be overwhelmed. It's not well written or it's not totally up to date, but just follow my tutorial. Try to add here different credentials like Facebook and Google and play around this authorization function, this token function, and after creating your own project, I believe that you are going to understand more. Okay, right now, let's quickly create our admin page and add new posts and users. We already did this in our action file. We know how to delete post, how to add post. We are going to use those functions and we will be able to manage our posts and users in the admin panel. We don't have users here, I think. So let's do the same thing for the user. I'm going to copy this and paste. Let's say delete user. I'm going to call the user model. And we are going to revalidate the admin page because we are going to list our users there. And let's say add user. Let's remove here and I will say take username, email, password, and image. And we are going to create a new user. Let's say new user and again admin. By the way, when we delete a user, we are also going to delete their posts. So here I will say delete the user, but before await post delete many, and the user ID will be this user's ID. Okay. And again, since we are using a form, we can use the previous state to send our errors. I will do the same thing here. And when we add a post, again, we are going to revalidate admin also. And when we delete. Okay. So let's use them in our admin page. So what I'm going to do is create 4 components. The first one will be admin posts. And I'm going to create here a form that we can add new posts, and user list and user form. Let's do that. Inside components, let's say admin posts, JSX and CSS. I'm gonna copy this and create 2 more admin users. And it's gonna be admin post form. And user form. By the way, let's change this copy. Okay, so let's create our functions quickly. Styles.container. I'm gonna copy this. And finally, admin users .module.css. Okay, let's use them inside admin page. I will say class name container, and inside we are going to have 2 rows. Let's import style. It's going to be CSS, rows and columns. Let's change here. Of course, it's going to be styles.container, styles.row, and let's say call actually. Inside first call, we are going to have the admin posts, but remember how we are using suspense. And I'm going to call admin posts. I'm going to do the same thing here. It's going to be post form. And I will create another row, and this time it's going to be admin users and user form. Let's import. Okay. So basically, inside admin posts and users, we are going to fetch our data, and those will be form. In this case, we don't need suspense. We are not fetching data. They are just forms. So let's open up posts. I will say quickly async. Remember how we are fetching data. Const posts await. And what was the name? Let's open up our data. As you can see, get posts. I'm gonna import, and using this data I can show my posts here. So let's say h1 posts. I'm gonna use my data.map, and for each post let's create a container, and it's gonna be a single post. Of course we are using map, so we need a unique key, and it's gonna be post ID. And inside we will have the post detail, which includes a post image and a post title. Let's say span post.title. And it's going to be source post.image. And if there is no image, we can show no avatar.png. Let's give size. It comes from next image. And finally, after this detail, we can add a delete button. To do that, again, we are going to be using form actions. So I'm going to create a form here, button, and delete. Of course, to delete this post, let's open up action and see how we delete this. As you can see, inside form data, we are going to need the post ID. To do that, you can create here an input and make this hidden. Name will be ID and the value will be post.id. But instead of doing this, we can actually bind our ID before calling our action. To do that, let's write here delete post with ID. And I'm going to create this function here. We can take the post ID and I will return delete post, this action, and I'm gonna bind my ID, the post ID. In this case, we should pass here our post ID like that. But if you don't want to do this, just call your delete post action and pass this input. Let me write it and comment out so you can explore. Okay. Let's give class name here, post button, and I can give here styles.post title, and that's all I think. Okay, copilot has written as CSS. Let's fix that. Let's check the others. Okay. Okay, it's correct. And let's log in. There is something wrong because we didn't use server directive. Let's close everything and open up admin page again and find our component here. And I'm gonna write use server. And of course, we are directly passing our ID. We don't have the structure. And using our action, we should take this ID before our form data. So I will comment this out. And oh, we can't call our functions like that, I think. Okay, so what you can do is create another component just for this form and take that ID as a prop. Because if we cannot use a function here like that, you have to take this from the component prop and pass it here. So I don't want to create a new file. Instead, I'm going to use the previous version like that. I will take as a hidden ID. But anyway, you know how to use the bind method right now. This tutorial was way too long, so I don't want to create different component. Let's see right now. And we have an error here. Okay. Of course, they are user avatars, but if you want to, you can add here no post.png, and let's click here. As you can see, it's gone. If I open up my blog page, it's not here anymore. Okay, it works. So I can do the same thing for the admin users. Again, it's gonna be async function, const users. We are gonna use get users data. And using this data, we will do exactly the same thing. So I will just copy and paste. Let's import image and delete user. Just like that. Let's try to delete Jane. And perfect. John. It's gone. It's that easy. You don't need any third-party library. This is how you can easily mutate data. And let's create our post form. So let's make this a form element, and the action will be, let's say, form action, because we are going to be using use form state hook. Remember how we are doing this. Const state form action use form state hook. We are going to call our action, which is add post, and the state will be undefined. Let's import this from React DOM, and inside this form, let's say h1 tag, add new post. We are going to have the post title, description, Slack, and image. It was image or img. Let's check. Okay, it's image. User is also image. I mean img. And they all are going to be string. Actually, description can be a text area. Let's move it here. And it's going to have 10 rows. And finally, a button. Let's say add. And if there is an error, we are going to show it like this. Let's check. Add post, of course, state.error. Okay. And of course, since we are using a hook, it should be use client. Let's try test from panel. I'm gonna add, and something went wrong. Let's see. Oh, we don't have any user ID. It's really important. So again, I will say hidden, and it's gonna be user ID. We don't need this, but we are gonna need a value. But how we are gonna reach to our user ID? If you remember, after the authentication, we passed our user ID to user session. We can use it. To do that, let's open up the admin page. And I will say async. And I'm going to call my auth function. I will say const session await auth. And inside this session, we have the user. So let's come here and say user ID equals session user.id. Actually, we don't need this question mark because in any case, we are going to have the session thanks to middleware. So we can delete this. Let's take this as a prop. Where's our form? Here. And I'm going to pass it here. If you think this hidden input looks a little bit weird, you can use the bind method here because we have the user ID. So let's try again. Let's copy this and paste. And it's here. Perfect. Let's check blog page and it's here. Awesome. So let's do the same thing for new user and after give a style and end the tutorial. It's going to be exactly the same thing. I will copy this user form and I'm going to paste. Let's say user. Actually, we don't need this user ID. Why did I created that? So I'm gonna delete this and we are gonna need username, email, one more is gonna be password. Let's change the input type, it's gonna be password. And I'm gonna delete this text area. And one more thing we are gonna need, by the way, and it's gonna be a select element. And the name will be is admin. If it's user, it's gonna be false. If it's an admin, it's gonna be true. And let's write here one more, and I'm gonna say is admin. Just like that, and by default it's gonna be false. We can choose user or admin. Let's try. I will say user from panel at gmail.com. Password is admin is, let's actually say no and yes, because we are asking question. Okay, let's say no. I will add, and as you can see, it's here. Perfect. So let's give our style. I will just copy and paste. As you can see, exactly the same thing as we did before. And the post form, exactly the same, like that. And for these lists, as you can see, they are just going to be display flags, justify content space between. And the same thing for users. Like that. So let's make them row because they are vertical right now. I'm going to open up my admin CSS and let's delete them and paste our CSS. As you can see, it's much better, but we can give space here. So I will say display flags, flags direction column, and gap between each row will be 100 pixels, just like that. Let's delete, add new one, last post. Okay. And let's say last user. It's gonna be admin. And it's here. Okay guys, that's all I think. If I missed something, just let me know in the comments. So right now you know how to create your pages. Of course, our password is too weak. How to fetch data. You know how to log in with social media accounts and credentials. And you know how to protect routes. And you know how to add data using server actions. So nothing else you need to know to create your own project. And as I said, if you want to go deeper and master your React skills, you can add your email to wishlist. It's going to be in the description. I hope you liked it. If you learned something new today, please like the video. You can support LlamaDev by using the link in the description below or by joining the channel. Don't forget to follow LlamaDev's social media accounts. I hope I'll see you in the next tutorial. Goodbye.